Welcome to the Propeller Club of Northern California. And it's nice to see so many smiling and cheerful faces this morning. As you know, we have a very, very packed schedule. So what we are going to do is I'm going to do a very brief opening, and we are going to then go to our speakers. As you know, includes Mike Jacobs with PMSA, the General Counsel. He'll be doing an analysis of the Howard Terminal EIR. Mike will be followed by Luis Cuadra and Gabriela Jiminez from Berg Davis, who will be discussing the outreach campaign of the East Oakland Stadium Alliance. And they have a PowerPoint that they're going to share with us. The first thing I want to say is that we have a number of events at the Propeller Club that are coming up very shortly. And I just want to remind you that we have Maritime Day on May 21st, which is a Friday. And we've got Ed Washburn from Pasha, Tori Presti from National Shipping, and Nick Marone from the Seafarers. On the Brandon McDonald from PCC Logistics, Aaron Shems from Storm PO, and Ed Kearney from Boundary Layer Technologies will be discussing what's been going on with their companies during COVID. So, and then finally, we have our Storms, Flooding, and Sea Level Defense Conference on the 13th of April. So, for those of you who are interested,
hey, what's up?
No. Before I introduce Mike Jacobs, I am going to need everybody to mute themselves, please. And I am going to ask Todd Crawshaw to run a brief video. You may have heard that Howard Terminal isn't being used for very much. And there's a very interesting video by the East Oakland Stadium Alliance that shows what life is like at Howard Terminal. And for you truckers, of course, this will be no secret. So without further ado, Brother Todd, could you roll the film there?
Will do.
Howard Terminal is a critical 50-acre staging area that enables trucks to efficiently move cargo between ships, land, and rail. 1,200 trucks pass through Howard Terminal daily, carrying food, medical supplies, and goods our region relies on. Howard Terminal has reduced congestion by taking these trucks off West Oakland Street's 880 and rail lines. Building a stadium, luxury condos, and office buildings would push truck traffic back into neighborhoods and make the port less competitive. Keep Howard Terminal and our working waterfront intact.
Very, very good. Excellent production. Anybody who is wondering what was going on there, that'll give you a good insight. That was a timed video, so you can see the place is busy on a constant basis. Now to our main event. Mike Jacobs needs no introduction. As we all know, Mike has been the general counsel for the PMSA. Mike has been the point person on Howard Terminal. He has been doing the analysis for the industry. He has been looking at all of the reports. He has been advising us since this whole issue got started 2 years ago. Is it 2 or 3? I can't remember now, Mike. Okay, so we rely on Mike for a lot of his insights and his analysis, and he has looked through this EIR. He's going to give us an overview of what to expect, what's in it, and where are the issues of concern. As I said he will be followed by Luis Cuadra and Gabriela Jiminez, and they're going to discuss what you can do as a company, as a business, and as an individual to do outreach and make sure that the Oakland City Council and the mayor hears your voice. So without further ado, I want to introduce Mike Jacob, General Counsel for PMSA. Michael, welcome as always. We look forward to your presentation, and you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Bob, and thanks for the opportunity and the forum. We really appreciate Propeller Club being engaged and being a place where people can come together and feel safe expressing opinions, but also asking questions. And so this is a great forum for that, even when we're doing stuff online and not in person. So thank you for bringing everyone together as always. You know, I think one of the things that's so tricky about this project that we all know is that there's just so many moving parts, and having the ability to talk about really complex projects in a comprehensive way is pretty much the only way that any organization, whether it's a city or the port or those of us in the public, are able to have these conversations. So the publication of a draft EIR, even for those of us that are opposed to a project, in some ways is a really good thing. Because the purpose of an environmental impact report under CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, is really to force project sponsors to define what their project is, and to require public agencies to analyze that project and potential impacts and really what are the related policy issues that are outstanding, right? So in the context of all of that, the purpose of an EIR is to inform decision makers. It is to recommend optimal outcomes for residents, obviously, but also in all of the specific components of an EIR that range from air quality to aesthetics, to traffic and water quality, things like that. And then to isolate changes that can't be mitigated or overcome if you went forward with the project. If you're a policymaker and you're voting on a project, you want to know what's significant and unavoidable from an environmental point of view. So we can get into some of those specifics, and as Stas said, we're starting to break down the document. Certainly at this stage, we're not going to be giving everyone a full rundown of what's in 6,000 pages of what's been written, including all the appendices and all that. But certainly this is a great opportunity for us to point out where some places are that people in our industry can plug into this process, can add value to the process. And I want to thank Stas for also including Luis and Gabriela at the end of the call, because they have a presentation, a short PowerPoint that'll show you exactly when the meetings are, when the deadlines for submitting comments are, and how you can do that. And obviously, we'll want to encourage everyone to be engaged in the process and to add their voice. And once you're going through all of this, and I think it'll become pretty apparent that, well, I've been looking at it now for a couple of weeks, and this Monday morning I was, feeling groggy like the rest of you, and I couldn't tell whether it's because I've been sitting in front of my computer screen reading the EIR because I lost an hour. And the initial view that I have on this is never has it taken a city so many pages to say so little. We have a very, very complex project that has a lot of different impacts. But unfortunately, there are so many gaps in this analysis regarding what we care about and what we've isolated as issues going forward, that, especially with respect to trucking and transportation operations, that are really significant. That I think that it really behooves all of us on our side of the ledger to continue to inform the city as to where an EIR is deficient, right? So as I said, the publication is a good thing in some respects, even for project opponents, because it lays out all of these issues. It presents the analysis that the project sponsor, the A's, and the lead agency, in this case, the city, want the public to see. And they're analyzing the project that the A's want to move forward. That is not a level playing field. And if you are of the opinion that somehow, just because an EIR has been published and involves a third-party lead agency, that it's not going to, in some way, shape, or form, reflect the desires of the project sponsor, well, that's just naive. And it's our responsibility as concerned citizens, businesses, workers, and stakeholders to inform the city as the lead agency where there are gaps in the analysis. And when this process is done correctly, it's somewhat iterative. I say somewhat because it isn't necessarily a conversation, but there needs to be an opportunity for us to comment. And the city, as a public lead agency, should be an honest broker and reply honestly in the final EIR, or if they identify that these gaps are so significant as to require additional analysis, do supplemental environmental review. And it's our job to raise those issues. So that being the context of moving forward, I don't want to go through this on a case-by-case basis, because I think that would just really, be boring, but also be a little bit counterproductive in terms of just highlighting and signposting for people where there are issues that I think should be pretty obvious. But I did want to help direct some of this conversation to things that we know about and that we care about, so we can be part of this conversation a little bit more productively. And that is to talk about things that we know. And so if you're submitting comments on the EIR, the city cannot ignore you. They have to reply in the final EIR to your comments. And as policymakers, the people who have to make the decisions based on this EIR, so that's the city council members, future port commissioners, potentially the State Lands Commission and BCDC, they want a full airing of these items too. So regardless of whether or not they're project supporters or opponents, conceptually, this process, again, gives us the opportunity to fill in gaps. And there are a lot of them. So I wanted to start with what we all know is going to be just a huge potential impact area, and that's on trucking. It's something where the people on this call that are stakeholders from the trucking community, but also from trucking customers and everyone else in the intermodal supply chain, but also West Oakland residents and other residents of Oakland that actually care about mobility in their city, I think should be distressed. And it gives us an opportunity to step into, again, these analytical gaps of what's missing out of the EIR, both in the transportation chapter and in the air quality chapter. And actually, I'll give you a couple of sites so you can go look at this on your own and form some of your own opinions, and it can help direct what you want to put into your comments. In transportation, it's page 4.15-86. And in air quality, it's pages 4.2, 39 through 41. And this is about what happens with the existing trucks at Howard Terminal. How do you accommodate the uses that occur now at Howard Terminal Stoff's played the video at the beginning of the hour to highlight the fact that when we hear this narrative from the project supporters, from their perspective, this is an empty parking lot. We have heard that narrative since 2018, and it is just fundamentally untrue. The way that this has been expressed in the EIR, in these existing use descriptions, is essentially that this is overnight truck parking. And the characterization that Howard is just a parking lot would lead you as a policymaker maybe to believe that that means you can just park a rig anywhere. You can move these things anyplace else. They don't have a lot of additional commercial value, and there aren't environmental benefits associated with the current operation of Howard Terminal. We know all those things aren't true. But instead of going into those questions in some detail, what the EIR does is it assumes them away. So very specifically, when the EIR looks at what could happen when you no longer make this space available to trucks, it says, and this is from the transportation section, the existing tenants and users of Howard Terminal are assumed to move to other locations in the seaport, including the roundhouse parking adjacent to Howard Terminal, the city, or the region, where their uses are permitted under applicable zoning and other regulations. And it goes on to talk about how there's tons of space at the roundhouse for everyone to do what they do at Howard. And then it also says the VMT, which is vehicle miles traveled, which is the metric in which the EIR measures transportation impacts. And we can take a step back on that in just a second. But it also says the VMT associated with truck travel is likely to change, but the magnitude of the change and whether VMT would increase or decrease is currently not known by either the project sponsor, the city, or the port. Therefore, estimating the change in VMT would be speculative and therefore not concluded. Okay, so we're in the transportation business. This is a transportation asset. The impacts that we've been talking about are about how to transport goods. This is the transportation chapter of the EIR. And with respect to trucks, they assume two things: no impact, and two, they don't have to do an impact analysis on VMT because it's speculative and therefore we're not going to do it. That's a huge gap, and it's a gap that we need to fill. It is our obligation as parties that are interested to come in and say, wait a second, that's crazy. You've had years to analyze this, and the purpose of the EIR is to inform, and it's to analyze and to recommend. And you've done none of those things in this document with respect to what we do and what the fundamental purpose of this existing operation at the terminal is. It's a huge gap. The same issue exists in that air quality chapter. It goes into more detail, and it pretty laughably even tries to take the recent BCDC report as a basis for saying why you don't need additional assets like Howard Terminal, when that report obviously concludes the exact opposite. But it's even more kind of, I don't want to use the word devious, but maybe oblivious in the air quality chapter to say that you can just assume away the impacts of changing in truck travel, because we all know, especially if you are a motor carrier, how sensitive the community and the city, and rightfully so, are about where trucks actually go from an emissions perspective, from a congestion perspective, from a parking perspective. It is exceptionally prescribed, and again, rightfully so, under the truck management plan. You know, in the latest iteration of the West Oakland specific plan, but also the West Oakland Community Action Plan, which was adopted by the Air District and by the Air Resources Board in conjunction with the West Oakland community, the idea is to take industrial activities, including truck movements, and move it out of the community and move it back into industrial buffer areas. The industrial buffer area that we have is the 3rd Street corridor, including Howard Terminal, west of Broadway, south of 880, east of Adeline. That is where we move those activities. The EIR here in the air quality section even acknowledges that in that space, there is not enough room for the displacement of these trucks. It also acknowledges that parking on the street cannot achieve the same level of benefit to anyone in the intermodal supply chain that Howard Terminal does. And yet, it still just assumes that even though VMT is vehicle miles traveled is likely to change, it's speculative, and therefore they don't conduct an analysis. There's no analysis. It affirmatively does not exist in the EIR. So we're in a place where it's incumbent on us to tell people why this is important, why they need to analyze it, and why this is a gap, and probably why it's not appropriate for us to assume that somehow this just magically takes care of itself within the port. That's my dog. I'm going to let her out for a sec. Stop. Hold on for 1 second. Okay. Sorry about that. But I think we'll go back to that one step further in the air quality world and say, can you imagine a scenario where if, as a marine terminal, a maritime tenant came in and said, you know what, we're going to start using Howard Terminal again for ship to shore and be doing loads cross dock and moving cargo across here. And the response to that question that we would inevitably get from the Port Commission, which is, what are you going to do with all the trucking activity that happens on Howard Terminal right now? If we said, who cares? We'd get laughed out of the room. If we said, someone will take care of it, but we don't really need to analyze where these trucks go, the community would go crazy. They should go crazy. That's a stupid answer. That's what we have in the EIR. There's no there there. And again, so huge analytical gap that doesn't rise to the level of analysis that we would be held to if we walked in with our own project. Maybe part of that is the discrepancy between the city being the lead agency on this project and the port being the lead agency on this project. Because there's certainly a lot of other places when it comes to air quality that we can get to in just a second, where I think we'll point out, and it's, again, our obligation as stakeholders to point out that there are problems. But I just don't understand why these issues are assumed to go away, assumed to be insignificant, and not actually analyzed. Why is that important for us? Because again, whether you're a project supporter or an opponent, the way that you recommend optimal outcomes and you inform decision makers about how to mitigate issues is to isolate and analyze and measure the significance of the issue. So if you assume that drayage truck issues don't exist, there's no basis in this EIR for mitigation based on the impacts. And if you don't have a basis for the significance, you can't mitigate it. So here's the upshot of that. If you thought the A's were moving in and the A's in the city would be taking care of impacts to your business, they can't do it if they don't analyze it. And if they don't analyze it, it's not in here as a mitigation. So we're missing out. Even if you believe that the stadium's a good thing, good for the community, you would want to have these things analyzed so their impacts could be mitigated. And they're just not, because they're assumed to go away. On VMT, I alluded to the change in significance on VMT earlier. I want to talk about that a little bit more. So vehicle miles traveled, VMT, is now the standard under California law for how to analyze significant impacts on transportation. And it's essentially a proxy for congestion and also for emissions. And it's somewhat controversial when they made that change, but they made the change, and it is the rules, and so that's what we go by. But you might be familiar with in the past was that transportation impacts were actually measured by another standard, and that standard was level of service. It's called LOS. And that's when you knew your transportation infrastructure was potentially overwhelmed by the impacts of a project. One of the traditional LOS measures of significance was an intersection's ability to move traffic at a specific rate, and then they'd give it a grade. So if your intersection worked properly and moved traffic freely, you were given an LOS of A. If it failed and it was in perpetual gridlock, you were given a grade of F. And there were obviously gradients in between. This does not do that. VMT is actually an especially bad analysis, analytical format for the analysis of freight transportation projects, because as our projects get more successful, VMT increases. And that's because it's linear with the amount of truck travel we do. So if we're moving more containers, we would expect VMT to increase. And it would be linear with growth in a multimodal context after you take out comparison for how much stuff moves by rail versus truck and things like that. But needless to say, for us, VMT is not a good evaluation of impacts in and of itself. It needs to be put together with something like LOS. That doesn't happen here either. So we don't have a good appreciation from the way that this data is presented in the EIR of how that works. And why don't we know how VMT and levels of service integrate with one another? Because VMT isn't analyzed, because the EIR says that estimating changes in vehicle miles traveled and resulting emissions would be speculative, and therefore the analysis isn't being done. So again, we can't come back and ask for more mitigation. Even if you think the project's a good project, you can't come back and say, I really don't think that the proposal for the intersection of Adeline and 3rd is adequate based on how VMT and LOS work. Because there was no analysis done, wasn't conducted. You can't do it. So as an industry, if in the past, you may recall having heard directly from the A's, as many of us on this this call have, including me, don't worry, we'll address your issues in the EIR. Pretty much our biggest issue, not addressed in the EIR. So that's a huge gap and really disappointing. And frankly, not what we were expecting from the city. On another issue that I know from a mobility point of view is very obvious to folks, is the question of how is the ports intermodal system supposed to be working if we are not accommodating rail, including rail growth, including the ability to move containers in and out of the UP and BN yards safely and effectively, and how is this going to impact that, both from a rail safety perspective, which is obviously top of mind, but just to be very crass, outside of safety, there's network effects that frankly impact our business more than potential one-time issues that are very local in impact, obviously devastatingly local if you're the person who gets hit by a train and you have a fatality or a severe injury. But for the system, for the network, there are very, very large pervasive problems about mobility associated with this project. And that drives the question of the grade separations. The grade separations issue is A, not new. B, like the trucking ones, has been around since the beginning of the project. It was initially, from what we understand, the reasons why Major League Baseball for years told the A's not to go to this site, just because it has such impeded ingress and egress. The analysis associated with this problem is also pretty dreadfully deficient. It's such a huge component of the transportation impacts of this project, and yet the analysis that was done for trains blocking this site was 1 day. I'm sorry, it was 1 week. In that 1 week, there was one train that blocked that area of Howard Terminal for 87 minutes. And the EIR goes out of its way to say that that was an unusual event in the span of 1 week. We all know if you live or you work down in Jack London Square, like I do, my office is right next to the train tracks. Having one train per week that blocks that intersection for over 80 minutes would not be that unusual. It might not happen at the same time of day all the time, but there are plenty of times where you might have multiple freight trains in a week that are blocking those intersections. Maybe not for 87 minutes, sometimes more, sometimes less, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes during the day. But there is no way that you can conduct an observation of that site for 1 week and then determine that you don't have to take those events that have the most impact on that site. And also, frankly, the most impact on our ability to actually move cargo intermodally into account, because they're unusual or they're out of the ordinary, when obviously the opposite is true. And the reason why that's so important is because most of the time when you see trains that are stopped and they are blocking access to Jack London Square, sometimes all the way down to Oak Street and Embarcadero West, when they're longer trains. And as we all know, as we grow, longer trains are a function of and demonstrative of our success at growing our intermodal capacity at the port. It's a good thing for everybody. It means we're moving more cargo, but not more local cargo, more intermodal cargo, IPI. That means east of the Rockies, which is a good thing. It's what we all want. But anyways, I digress. The trains that block those intersections are intermodal trains, because when you're coming in off of the Transcon, UP has to break up its trains to fit into that yard. And the way it does it is it uses that track as trailing track. It moves past the yard all the way, and then it breaks up that train into more manageable components and slots them back in to the yard. The yard just isn't big enough to accommodate a full unit train without breaking it up. And so it has to go past the UP facility. It has to block intersections for them to be able to break it up. We expect that to be occurring more. The fact that the EIR says that the current conditions are unusual, but then doesn't look at obviously what we expect to occur in the future and future conditions is really a big gap too. That being said, the EIR doesn't completely ignore it. It can't ignore it. It's too obvious. It can't just assume it away. But disappointingly, it only analyzes one grade separation, not a fully grade separated site. And when it does analyze it, it does it in, well, frankly, in an insufficient way. But I think before I move off of this topic, I do think it's worth mentioning one thing, which is these are laid out as variants to the project, right? They're not components of the project. They're variants of the project. So that means the A's have not committed to and are not proposing any grade separations other than one pedestrian and bike overcrossing. They're actually proposing that this go forward at grade. The city council would have to say, no, we want you to put in a grade separation. But the way this document is laid out, there's not even an opportunity for them to say, we want you to fully grade separate the site. Why? Because again, the EIR did not analyze a fully grade separated access. And I think it's pretty shameful, and I'm going to read this again. The reason that was given for that in the alternatives analysis, and it said the provision of a grade separated crossing, and again, this talks about getting a fully grade separated site before the project's constructed. The provision of a grade separated crossing prior to commencement of project construction was deemed infeasible, given the length of time it would take to design, get approval for, and construct a new grade separated crossing, and the stated project objective to complete construction of the new ballpark, together with any infrastructure required within a desirable time frame, and to maintain the Oakland Athletics competitive position within MLB. So, to say that again, the provision of grade separations was deemed infeasible because of the ability to maintain the Oakland Athletics competitive position within MLB. That's pretty outrageous. I mean, basically what you're saying is, I'm going to have a project that's here for 6 decades. I'm not going to analyze grade separations, which you know will save people's lives, your fans' lives, the people who are going to be moving in here, because it might impact my ability to sign an outfielder or a third baseman in the next couple of years. Give me a break. This document is about analysis. It's about providing options to decision makers. They didn't even analyze it. And, you know, one grade separation can be analyzed without compromising the ability of the A's to compete in the MLB, but you can't include an analysis of 2 grade separations because of that. I mean, that's just BS. Let's just call it what it is. It's just stupid. So, I mean, stuff like that is riddling this. And that's, again, I'd like to come back and wrap up so we can get to Luis and Gabriela about what to do and how to comment. But the point of this is that it's incumbent on us to point out our issues. And the EIR itself is a document supposed to be iterative. It's supposed to provide options to decision makers. And that isn't happening here with the issues that we care about the most. How do you keep trucks and trains moving? I didn't get into the turning basin as much. That's actually one of the few places that is relatively good about this, and kudos to the port leadership for being explicit about that and forcing the city to deal with it and the A's to include the turning basin in. We're not happy with all the way that has occurred, but at least it isn't just so glaringly absent like these other issues. There are a lot of issues with lighting still and things like that nature and navigational safety. And I will say that just in looking at the water side and those maritime issues, one of the reasons why this EIR is deficient is the same reason it is in many other components, which is it's a plan to plan. There is not a very specific thing about what will exactly happen in this project. It's a roadmap for the A's and the city and the port and other stakeholders to come together in the future and do more planning with certain goals in mind. They do that with transportation demand management. They do that in here with GHGs, with greenhouse gases and other emissions issues, and they do it on the water side. There are not specific requirements for the A's to do specific things. There are specific requirements for the A's to get together with the city and make plans to try to do certain things. That doesn't cut it in our book when you're looking at a project of this magnitude with the potential impacts that it has. But I want to wrap with that, but also say, Stas, I appreciate the forum. I know people have very specific questions or technical questions about the EIR document. Please email me. Please feel free to ask. Is this something that I should be commenting on or asking for help? And in previous conversations I've had with folks on this call, like Scott Taylor from GSC, they've been open to having extensive conversations in detail, maybe an hour or so between parties. Happy to do that. I think that's a fantastic idea. So after Luis and Gabriela go through some of those next steps, please feel free to reach out to me and our team as resources. We're happy to help people focus their comments.
Michael, thank you very much for this. And obviously, there are a lot of questions. We will come back to you after Luis and Gabriela are through to make sure that people have a contact for you if they need more detailed analysis, and hopefully we can answer a few questions. Luis, good morning and welcome. And Gabriela, I see you there too. So welcome both of you. We would like to hear what your public outreach strategy is, and you both have the floor.
Great. I'm going to share my screen real quick so we can all follow along on the presentation. So just bear with me for one moment. Here we are.
Thanks for the great recap, Mike. That was very helpful. And Stas, thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm going to get started. Hello, everybody. I'm Luis Cuadra with Berg Davis Public Affairs, and we are here on behalf of the East Oakland Stadium Alliance. We'll be presenting our DEIR outreach strategy and future communication strategy, as well as speaking a bit about our plans moving forward. Joining me is my colleague and co-presenter, Gabriela Jiminez, and also the newest member of our team, Cheryl Walton, our grassroots organizer. Cheryl will play an important role helping grow and mobilize our alliance. Cheryl, I think I saw you on the call. Would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself? You there, Cheryl?
Good morning, everyone. Cheryl Walton here. I've been with EOSA for a couple of months now, and I pretty much enjoying my outreach process. Putting out our door hangers and identifying key community groups. I've been organizing for over 20 some odd years, so I bring a lot of contacts and networks, and I'm reaching out to every last one of them, and I'm really feeling real positive with some of the responses that I'm getting. So with faith and community groups, neighborhood councils, individual residents, and so forth. So, and I'm learning quite a bit on this call today, and thank you for inviting me.
Cheryl, this is Stas Margaronis. Could you make your email address or contact information available on the chat, so if anybody wants to reach out to you, they can?
Yes, thank you. And if you have any groups or organizations that you'd like for me to reach out to, please do so through that email. I'll put it in the chat now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you,
We also
Cheryl.
have it at the end of our presentation, so you can see it visually on there as well.
Okay, so you know, the East Oakland Stadium Alliance represents hundreds of maritime industries, labor, and stakeholder organizations. These are just a few of those organizations. Next slide, please, Gabriela. You know, for context, we wanted to share where we are in the process. The DEIR was released on February 26th, kicking off a 45-day comment period, which includes public hearings. The assumption is that the project will be heard by the City Council, will be voted on by the City Council by the end of the year. Next slide, please. You know, for further context, we wanted to share this slide. It shows all of the approvals that the project will need to go through, all of the agency approvals the project will need to go through once it's completed the local City of Oakland process. Next, please. I'm going to talk a bit about opportunities for everyone to participate in the process. And we certainly encourage you to do so. You know, the city took 2 years to prepare this 6,000-page document, and they are giving us 45 days to review it. So if you feel you need additional time to review the document, we're asking everyone to submit a request to the city asking for at least a 45-day comment period extension. You know, we provided a link to the email distribution list and sample content to request an extension. And Stas will forward this presentation to everyone at after our meeting.
Yes.
Presently, we have until 4 p.m. on April 12th to submit comments on the draft EIR electronically. Again, we have included a link. There are 2 opportunities during the review process to provide public testimony and submit written communications. The first is a Landmark Preservation Advisory Board, which meets next Monday, March 22nd at 5 p.m. The meeting will be held virtually and will focus on the historic and cultural resource aspects of the project. The second opportunity is at the Planning Commission on, I believe that's Wednesday, April 7th at 3 p.m. Again, another virtual meeting. You know, the intent of both of these meetings is for the community and local stakeholders to provide input on the DEIR. We are in the process of finalizing our review in conjunction with Mike of the document, and are prepared to help you and support you however we can. We've developed a West Oakland one-pager, which just speaks a bit to some of the impacts we identified on the surrounding community. An engagement one-pager that speaks to all the opportunities with links of where you can provide public comment. And then finally, a link to our project website, which is updated frequently. And I think with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Gabriela.
Yeah, so thank you, Luis. And I really appreciate Mike's kind of laying the groundwork for everything that the Alliance is concerned about. And there's several ways that you can engage in addition to public comment and submitting written comment. It's really valuable to broaden our coalition as widely as possible and really engage folks who are going to be most impacted by these plans. And one way to do that right away is to engage either your employees or your members. Many of you are a part of our Alliance already and sign on to our letters, but you also have hundreds and thousands of employees who work in and around the port who will have their day-to-day work impacted greatly by the Howard Terminal Stadium plans. And so it's important to really elevate and amplify their voice as well, in addition to yours when it comes to public hearings. The City Council finds a lot of value in hearing how, you know, everyone will be impacted by this. So one thing we have for you to make it easy are these flyers, and it's basically just outlines the issues that we've discussed and our concerns about Howard Terminal Stadium plans for your employees. And on it, there's a QR code that folks can scan, and it'll immediately take you to our website, and folks can sign their name and send a letter to all of the City Council and the mayor, you know, stating their opposition to a Howard Terminal Stadium and a support for the Coliseum stadium. And if you want to give it a try, you can scan, open up your phone camera and scan that QR code, and you'll kind of see what it's like and how easy it is. So you could either email this flyer to your employees or members if you have an email list, or print it out, put it in the break room, hand it out to folks during morning meetings, things like that, to again further engage them, to bring them onto this into our growing coalition, and to really give them an opportunity to have their voices heard. The next is, again, in addition to the public comments and the hearings, there's several other ways to help amplify this message and really get it out to the public. We know that from polls that we've conducted that the community very much supports rebuilding a stadium at the Coliseum and opposes Howard Terminal, but it's really making sure that they know that this is happening that will then encourage them to speak out. So it's so important to talk to your friends, talk to your family, and everyone as much as you can about this, educating them for them to then act. So easy way you can do that. We have a Twitter account that we often will post infographics. You can share those, the Howard Terminal video you saw at the beginning of this meeting, we post that there, and you can share that through your social media network. And it's an easy way to amplify the message and to get more folks on board. In addition to that, Cheryl mentioned that we're conducting community canvassing. We have door hangers, again, with a QR code where folks can send in, members of the community can say, we want the stadium to be rebuilt at Coliseum, not on the working waterfront. And Cheryl's really leading that charge to get volunteers organized to put up those door hangers. So if you yourself, or again, members, of your union or other folks want to volunteer a little time to send those out, they've been really effective so far in what we've seen. People are really responsive. Many people didn't know that this was happening down the street from their house and how they would be impacted. So it's really valuable to do these canvassing. So again, if you're interested in participating or volunteering, Cheryl's the person to contact, and she can share dates of when these are happening. In addition to that, we're planning on several days of action, and they're being formulated now. So if you are on our email list already, you'll likely get pinged about participating, but absolutely reach out to us if you want to get engaged and participate in some actions around this issue. And lastly, another way that is a great way to lend your voice and your expertise is to write op-eds. They're often read by elected officials, by their staff, and other community leaders, and it's really a good way to, again, knowing what you know about the trucking industry and the port industry. It's something that isn't really well known publicly, to lend your perspective into an op-ed about how this would impact you and the region, the economy, is really valuable. And we're absolutely happy to help provide guidance and information about how best to do that. We are a resource. And you'll also see on this slide, we're going to be engaging on a digital ad campaign, as well as a newspaper ad campaign that will be featuring different, voices of Oakland. And here you see one example of that. So keep an eye out for those. And if you want to get more information about bad campaign, please feel free to reach out. And with that, you have our contact information here. Cheryl's is also included. So, please don't hesitate to reach out if, you have questions, you want to get engaged, you want to share information with your employees or your members. We are here to be a helpful resource to you. And I think with that, we can open it up to questions. And Cheryl?
My phone number on there.
Okay,
It's a 3, not a 6 at the end.
2333.
Yes.
Okay, my apologies.
Problem.
okay, Gabriela, thank you very much. So let me come back to number one. If we will make the PowerPoint available to everybody, we'll have that available tomorrow for everyone. We will have a recording of today's presentation. Todd, when will we have the recording?
Probably the end of the day.
Todd?
Did you hear me? End of today?
Okay, so we'll have that up. So today's presentation will be available to everybody who's signed in today. You'll have that at the end of the day. And we will have the PowerPoint as well with the contact information, Gabriela. So if you have any of those questions, they will be the people to go to. Scott Taylor. Scott, can you hear me?
Sure can, Seth. Hi.
I heard on the call last week that you have put together a letter that you had been, share that for just what you did for 2 minutes, just so people would have an idea of how you have handled it at GSE.
Sure. Real quickly, the East Oakland Stadium Alliance did all the work for me. It was pretty easy. All I had to do is take a snapshot of the QR code and send it out to all of our employees. I think we probably got, out of 100 employees, I heard from about 25 or 30 who just said, just did it, took care of it, thanks a lot, we want to support. It's really easy to do, and I'd encourage everybody to just take a snapshot of that QR code and send that letter out to all of your employees, friends, relatives. It's very, very effective. It's a great letter. Thanks, EOSA, for doing all the work for me. You made it easy.
Scott, thank you very much. My questions, I just want to summarize what I think I heard you say just to make sure I've got this right. Number one, you said that the EIR really did not take the impact of trucking into account, that they described this as a speculative process and did not of truck movements and how they would be impacting various intersections going in and out of the port. Is that correct? You're on mute there.
Yeah, so that's essentially right, Stas. I mean, there are some specific intersection evaluations and improvements, and people should look at those. But there is a dearth of analysis of what happens with those trucks when they're displaced from Howard. And that really does need to be filled by people telling the city, here's what really happens, here's my experience. And they are required to respond to those in the final EIR and to acknowledge that those impacts might be significant and should be addressed.
The same situation held true for air quality, is that correct? Yeah,
those are based on the same analyses, and I don't want to take too much time for people, but I think it's probably worth saying that if you look at things like GHGs, what the analysis does is it compares a baseline from the current Coliseum operations of the A's versus what's proposed as the Howard Terminal operation of the A's. It is not taking a baseline current port operations at Howard Terminal. It's pretty astounding. So those are the types of things that we need to talk about. And for air quality, as everyone in this industry knows, everyone in the community knows, we have made substantial investments in cleanup. If you were the Oakland A's and the Oakland A's were proposing a marine terminal, the project that's being proposed would not pass the air quality standards for a marine terminal. The Port of Oakland would not approve this project if it was a marine operation. But apparently they will if it's a ballpark. That blows my mind. So we're going to have to keep pushing on that. And Stotts, you're exactly right. If it doesn't reflect the real world situation from trucking on the ground, it needs to be addressed. And the only people to address it are us.
Okay, and the third issue that you raised was the issue of rail to have grade separations in order to prevent, to allow the UP and the BNSF to have access to the port. And that come up in the EIR?
It did. Unfortunately, the analysis does not include the potential for fully grade separated access to that site. So that's the concern. It's not that they didn't identify it as an issue; they couldn't ignore it. But the solutions are all half-baked. They don't provide an analysis of a fully grade separated site.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let me open this up to questions now. Okay, Evie, would you like to ask the first question? Evie Wong. Evie.
Well, hi, Stas. Hi, everyone. Great presentation. And I wanted to appreciate Peter Dreyfus's comment about the luxury condos, because I almost want to say we really should be talking, it's not just the stadium, stupid, because it is almost a wolf in sheep's clothing that the fans, everyone gets excited about the stadium, but the actual things that the A's organization is after is the whole complex of luxury condos, 24/7 residents, changing really the whole landscape of Jack London Square. And I would put to, again, I've asked this question a couple of times of where right now Howard Terminal is in the industrial zone. The city would have to change that. And that is a huge undertaking. And as well, Mike, from your report, it just seems asinine. They take all of this time to do the EIR, but all of the points that it was supposed to have been a promise to community and to all of the maritime stakeholders to have done all of the analyses, it's crazy. And I feel like we've been wasting our time since 2019, just going to all of these meetings, and at the end, they put out an EIR like this, hearing the details. I mean, most of us, we don't have time to read through a 1,000-page thing, and thank you so much for breaking it down for us. But and I think Melvin even said it in the last call, is like, gosh, we are really fighting on the whole 24/7 residency takeover of Howard Terminal. it just we've got to change the mindset. It's getting, yeah. Anyways, I can go on, but it is really upsetting that we are all spending so much time on this when the rail, the residents, the giving up on East Oakland, everything is wrong about this Howard Terminal project. Everything.
Mike, the issue, I think one of the questions here is what about the condominiums and is the EIR? And last week, Melvin McKay, as Evie pointed out, said, look, what about the fact that the port, that there's a container terminal, OICT, just down the road from Howard Terminal? What happens with the noise and lights and all of the activity? Aren't there going to be about the terminal operation?
Yeah, well, and that raises a fantastic point about EIRs. So the EIR analyzes the impact of this project on the environment. It does not analyze impacts that the existing community around this project will have on the project, which is really problematic for us because the impacts that this project will have on our ability to do business are really phenomenal. But what's more important in the long run is our ability to do a new EIR when we have a new project upwind of 3,000 luxury housing units. So Evie and Melvin are spot on with the question about residential housing. We cannot do things if we have opponents that are built in to this project for future growth of the port. One of the things that's actually really positive about all the regional planning that's been done, the air quality work that's been done in West Oakland, is the city's policy to now has been to try to separate residential operations from industrial operations to facilitate better environmental justice outcomes for people in West Oakland. And that's something we all agree with. This is a 180 on that. And it says, we're going to bring people right in next to your operations. The EIR does not do any analysis of how that might impact our operations when we go to analyze what the impacts that we have are on the people in the project. So the EIR doesn't mesh these things both ways, right? So it has a one-way filter on impacts. What are the impacts that these residents have on the surrounding community? But it doesn't say, by the way, what are the impacts that the surrounding community has on these impacts on these residents? And that's what we're concerned about in the long term. In the short term, of course, are we worried about the additional traffic from residents and things like that? Of course we are. But in the long term, they represent a very existential threat on future growth, right? Can you improve future infrastructure at the Port of Oakland to accommodate more throughput? Probably not.
So what you're saying is that with the addition of new residents, we have a potential long-term conflict with any growth potential at Port of Oakland terminal operation. Is that a yes?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think.
Right. Other questioners? I have, thanks. The current project, okay, Howard Terminal police ask for water access for fishing. That comes from David Peters. David, I'm not sure that's kind of outside. Okay, David, go ahead.
Hi, I actually had a couple questions. I sit on the Howard Terminal Community Benefits Agreement Steering Committee. So I'm very familiar with a lot of the things going into this and the community asks around this project. And we're certainly doing a DEIR comment group exercise ourselves. And so a couple questions, Mike. One was about, I'm the co-chair of the History and Culture cohort. And so I'm interested in culture. So that was the topic, and there's my dog. That topic specifically reading in the draft EIR. So when I read culture, it exclusively focuses on the former historic residents, the Ohlone peoples. But I'm wondering, is there a way to consider cultural requirements for the existing neighborhoods? And this is Jacqueline Square more than West Oakland, but because of the race and equity focus of the community benefits agreement, we're focusing more on redressing current racial disparities in the West Oakland community. And one of the things we came up with is a culture and history museum, as well as ask around funding of local arts, and then space for the community to be at Howard Terminal. Is that something that's fair game in a DIR perspective?
Well, the short answer is yes, and the long answer is even better, because there are cultural impacts and aesthetics and things like that that are obviously discussed in the EIR, but the way that these processes work is that you'd be limited to some sort of mitigation associated with the significance of an impact. But from where you're sitting on the CBA, you're not limited by that policy frame, right? So I think to the extent that the EIR is deficient or is sufficient at identifying an issue, on the community benefit side, you don't have to be limited to that as a basis for moving forward. And my advice to you is that you take the mindset that you're not limited to that you are entitled as the community to all of the mitigation in the EIR exclusive of a community benefits agreement. So the EIR should be your baseline moving forward. Everything that's in there is not something that you need to bargain for in the community benefits agreement. Everything in the community benefits agreement should be over and above what they're required to do in the environmental document. And I think on the equity lens, one of the things that we've been talking about in the context of jobs and economic development is how much of part of the fabric of the Oakland community, both west and east, is in the diversity of the workforce at the port, the history of the railroad and freight industry in West Oakland, that those are significant components to the reason why that neighborhood exists. It's the way it is and why it needs to be preserved in terms of both the focus on equity and racial issues moving forward with respect to preservation of Black jobs in West Oakland very specifically. So we're not afraid to talk about that. We don't think that the community should be afraid of tackling those issues either. They should be front and center about what value needs to be preserved for that community. But it's not limited to the EIR. So yeah, you should feel free to leverage whatever you can in the EIR, but that should be your baseline moving forward.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's the position we're taking, is that anything in the EIR, anything in the EIR is separate from the CBA. You don't get to claim credit in CBA for something that you had to do for the EIR, and then trying to find ways to leverage the EIR to force community benefits. I think our approach is all of the current 144 asks must be implemented, by the developer, And we will take nothing less, given that there's 66 years and plenty of time and money to, mitigate the fact that, Black median income in West Oakland is 1/3 of white. So this historical, we would submit that the historical development and use of West Oakland is a misdevelopment in the result of redlining and segregation, and that the current status is woeful and something must be done to redress these differences. And would love to engage in conversation with anybody at the port, EOSA, whoever, to just talk about the material conditions of people that live outside the port gates. Because it's great jobs inside, not much outside. I speak that as a third generation West Oakland resident whose grandfather came here to work in the machinery industry in the port in the war.
Thank you very much. Rita, look, would you like to, you have questions?
Yes, I'm hoping there's time still. I'm a West Oakland resident. I've been bouncing around, I've been against this project from the beginning, and it is because of congestion, air pollution, and impacts on the port. And not that I'm in care about those. I have personal, but I can understand the impact to that. And what I don't understand is the city. I do understand that the city is going to get all this tax revenue from these big projects, these new things, but what I don't understand is what these impacts to the port, and where will the port? Isn't the port a major West Coast, destination for shipments? This one and in LA. And what would happen if this just goes away, or would it move, or what are the impacts to it? And I agree that thank you, Mike, for that amazing analysis of the EIR, because I've on the CBA along with David, but I was on the transportation cohort, and it was pretty much useless to be there because the questions I'd ask would always just be vaguely answered and never really answered. And it's like you knew that the city rep that was kind of guiding this process was completely on board on this project, and so it was just been frustrating, because how in the world can it not have an impact on our air quality? I moved into West Oakland 20 years ago when there were still trucks idling on the streets. And so I brought that up in our neighborhood association meeting, and people weren't aware that, when you do an aerial of that site right now, it's covered in trucks. Where are they going to go? And so I just don't understand. I think it's, and I really want to be involved and help out any way I can. But that is the question: what would happen to the port? Am I wrong that this is one of the major destinations for shipments on the West Coast?
Yeah, Rita, you're exactly right.
The question is,
I'm sorry, I can't
what
hear.
is the threat to the port, Mike?
Yeah, so Rita, it's an excellent question, because the issue for us is about the ability to reinvest and grow. So all of us have invested in the current terminal infrastructure based on an expectation of being able to grow over the next couple of years. Scott and his company has made investments in trucking based on the ability to grow over the next several years. The question is, what happens with the next generation of investments? So we can't finance the next step towards zero emissions equipment without significant additional infrastructure. That requires us to grow our traffic. We have all banked on growing green in Oakland, and part of the deal that we have with the port is that we're going to be investing billions of dollars in this gateway with the expectation that will be able to pay it back. And that requires significant growth. So the trade-off isn't that there's an instant reduction in traffic. The trade-off is that we won't have the capacity to grow. And that is direct with respect to Howard Terminal. It's indirect. It's direct in that, as you point out, we have about 300 and something thousand gate moves at Howard Terminal right now. Those trucks are not going to be in the West Oakland community. They're also not going to be in the industrial core of Oakland. In order to stage that equipment, move those boxes, you're going to have to be driving a lot more on the freeway, going back and forth, adding costs, time, congestion, and emissions that makes us less efficient. That's just Howard Terminal. And then all the other impacts of essentially designing a small city the size of Emeryville and placing it right on our doorstep. And frankly, the only transportation improvements that they're proposing is a grandiose bus stop. I mean, we all know in 2021, that does not pass as transit. It's pretty ludicrous. The idea that is not going to further impact our ability to move cargo is just laughable. And if you aren't fully allowing us to move intermodal traffic on rail by grade separating, it just lowers our capacity to improve volumes even further. So we don't see it as a short-term death knell, but definitely in the long term, it affects our ability to grow, and we'll become a small regional niche port, and that's not what we want, and that's not the bargain that we've struck with the Port of Oakland.
Hey, this is Susan with SSA.
Very good.
Stas. Hi, I just wanted to make a super quick comment to Rita, and thank you, Mike.
Yes, go ahead.
We, as everyone knows, we are the major terminal that will be impacted the most by this project. And to follow along the lines, we are right now the port's #1 revenue maker, which definitely will be at stake if this project goes through. I mean, I don't have the time to sit here and list every item that we have, but we're getting the word out. We're working with reporters, we're working with commissioners, working with Marika to get as many commissioners over here to see the terminal and to do the impacts. I invite anybody on this call that wants to come over to do the same. I mean, we are kind of the first stopping point. So, you know, if we don't operate, it filters down to the truckers, it filters down to the BCOs, it filters down definitely to the port. I mean, we are the first point of call here, so to say. So if terminal operations were to stop or to lessen in it's going to have a huge domino effect on the economy in Oakland itself and all surrounding areas. I mean, we just, our terminal alone are doing about 6,000 gate moves a day. So having said that, huge impact. You know, I know the port knows that. So, you know, we're doing whatever we can to get the word out as well. Thank you.
Okay. Well, on that note, I want to say to thank everybody for their time, for Mike, Luis, Gabrielle, and I want interesting and very, very informative discussion. Cheryl, thank you very much for your input. This is going to be an ongoing issue. Please get involved. Got the contact information for Luis and Gabrielle and Cheryl. Mike is available if you need somebody to come and discuss the EIR directly. We will get the information out. This is an ongoing effort. At the end of the day, what Mike said is that we risk becoming not the great port that we are beginning to be. We have a first call for the first time in a long time. We're likely to get more. That's going to start turning around if this project goes through and fails to take into account the Port of Oakland maritime operations, which Susan has warned you about, which Mike has warned you about, that we've heard from Scott Taylor at GSC Logistics over many, many meetings, from Evie as a customs broker, and from many of the rest of you. This is a life and death issue. It may not happen tomorrow, but it's going to happen very soon unless we have a resolution that really and truly encompasses the Port of Oakland maritime operations and protects it and makes sure that we have the room to grow. So on behalf of the Propeller Club of Northern California, I want to thank Mike, thank Louise, thank Cheryl, thank Gabriela. Our next meeting is April 28th with PCC, Storm Geo, and Boundary Layer. We will have the information out to you as soon as possible. Please take care of yourselves. We're still not out of this COVID situation. So thank you all for your service, and I hope to see you next month.